welcome to SmartCompany Talks Budget Special live from Canberra. My name's Eloise and I'm the editor of SmartCompany, and I'm very excited to be here today to help you better understand what's in the budget for small and medium-sized businesses. First, a big thank you to our sponsor Reckon for making this event possible today. Today's event is going to be quite interactive, so there's an opportunity to leave comments and questions as you're listening along at home, and shortly we'll be opening up a short survey that you can fill out, and you'll see the results towards the end of the session. Before we get to that, I'd like to introduce my panel today. Sitting next to me is Alan. Alan, could you tell us a little bit about your business and what you do?
Absolutely, and thanks for inviting me here. I'm really excited to be here today. So I'm Alan from our Teenage Drinks. We're a Canberra business producing non-alcoholic sparkling with a vision to make alcohol-free drinking fun and interesting. I'm also a chartered accountant, a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, and a board member of Pedal Power, which is a not-for-profit organisation advocating cycling.
Great, thanks for being here today, Alan. Alia, thanks also for joining the panel. Can you tell us a bit about your businesses and what you do?
Thanks, Eloise. I founded Evaluate Sustainability a couple of years ago, and we focus on helping small businesses reduce their carbon footprint by automating the carbon footprinting process and allowing them to focus on the reduction opportunities. I also own a commercial furniture business, 925 Interiors, which I've had for 18 years. I'm a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and sit on a number of not-for-profit and government boards.
Great, thanks for being here. Thanks. Sitting next to Alia, we have Peter Strong. Peter, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Eloise. So I'm Peter Strong. I'm the CEO of the Council of Small Business Organisations of Australia, COSBOA, and we're an organisation that's there to advocate for small business. Our members are associations who have direct membership of small business, like newsagents and hairdressers and those sorts of people who know about their own industry. So the job of COSBOA, my job, is to annoy the heck out of politicians and policymakers and get into the media and make sure people never forget small business. And I just want to say this is a very nice drink too, by the way.
Thanks, Peter.
Great, thank you so much for being here today, everyone. We've got a lot to discuss in the budget. There was a lot for small and medium-sized businesses, so we'll get to it, but just another reminder that there is going to be a short survey popping up on your screen at home shortly, so please do fill it out. Tell us what's most important to your business when considering this year's budget, and you'll see the results towards the end of the session. So let's start with a broad picture look of the budget. Peter, I know COSBOA, you've given the budget a rating of 7.5 out of 10. Can you tell us why that is?
Well, first of all, that's a distinction because it's a good budget. It covers a whole range of different issues, childcare, women's issues, aged care. We're getting into reg tech. There's a whole range of things I'm sure we'll talk about. I suppose people always ask, well, why didn't you give it a 10 or an 8.5 or something? The focus on sole traders is something we thought was missing. So let's say it's a very good budget. And that's the area where we think we can work with the government on sole traders, those people who aren't companies. A lot of contractors out there, and some of them do employ. That's missing. The vocational education training area, we want to really work a bit more on that. I'll be in a round table this afternoon getting more information about that, so hopefully that will improve the score. But they're the sorts of areas that we need to focus on as well. And of course, quarantine and the future. The people who gave it 7.5 said we really can't go there yet until we get the quarantine and those sorts of things managed. Then we can really focus on the economy. But good budget, a couple of things missing.
Great, that's a good starting point to now drill down into some of the more specific budget measures. I guess reading the budget in the lockup yesterday, it struck me that the government's decided to continue a couple of the successful policies of the last budget, and that's around their massive instant asset write-off scheme, so that will be extended for another 12 months, and also the loss carryback scheme, which is important for businesses that were previously profitable and were taxed on those profits. Now they can carry back some of the losses. I wanted to ask you, Alan, about that asset write-off scheme. Is it something that's useful for a business like yours?
Yeah, so it's very useful for a business like mine, where I'm a manufacturing business. So obviously acquiring machinery to be able to scale and increase our production is very important for us. And that policy is achieving its intended purpose for us, and that is during COVID, we actually did buy more machineries to increase our production capability to really leverage that instant asset write-off. I guess for other businesses where they're not machine heavy, then it might not be as useful for them as well. And I guess what's really important to note is that you need the money either through loan or retained revenue to be able to purchase those equipment at the point, and then wait for the tax refund to come through.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, and we saw this a few years ago when the government announced the $20,000 instant asset write-off. And I remember at SmartCompany we got a few people writing in asking where do they find the $20,000 cash? They thought it might land in their bank account soon. So it's an important thing to remember that this is a tax measure, it's a tax benefit, but it can be very useful for some businesses. Interestingly, this year they've also announced some change to how you can treat intangible assets. And Ali, I know you've been looking at that. Can you give us a sense of what that might mean for a business?
Yeah, I think it's great that they've included that, because I think cybersecurity is so important at the moment as well. So being able to invest in custom-made software or those kind of things and having it treated the same way as a physical asset is just what we need for a digital future.
Yeah.
And I was going to say the other thing that's come up recently is I think there was something like a 60% increase in the number of domain names registered through AUDA, and that's an asset in some ways as you develop along and become, that domain name might be worth a lot of money or it might not. And it's an interesting challenge. Do you depreciate a domain name as it drops in value, or how do you work it? So it's a really important issue, isn't it, the intangibles?
Yes, I think that this inclusion in the broader digital economy package will allow businesses to self-assess that value and that depreciation schedule, which is really important. So thinking about this digital economy strategy, it's worth $1.2 billion. There's lots of little bits and pieces, and we saw it announced before the budget, so some people might be familiar with some parts of it. But we got a little bit more detail yesterday, particularly around e-invoicing, how the government might spend the money there. Also extending their digital solutions program, which offers businesses the ability to get sort of access to free workshops. I know, Alan, you've been looking quite closely at this package. What's in it for a business like yours?
Yeah, so you already mentioned the two highlights, and that's this e-invoicing and then also the digital help solutions. So I think, really, as a business owner now, I just can't imagine. I take my hats off to all the business owners who have been operating in the last 3 decades, when e-invoicing was not a thing, cloud accounting software wasn't a thing, and people had to keep all the physical receipts in a shoebox or in whatever box that they can fit all the receipts and give it to a bookkeeper. Like, I just can't imagine how I would operate like that right now.
Yeah.
And I think that just really highlights them, like how we've normalized the just digital tools. And I think the e-invoicing for a lot of small businesses who aren't quite there yet with their digital literacy, this is a really good opportunity to get a bit of support from the government to help them transition from paper to electronic with the e-invoicing. And I guess the other highlight that you mentioned that I think is pretty exciting and much more applicable to wider number of businesses, and that is the digital solution.
Yep.
So from what I can see, every state and territory, there will be organisations who are registered as part of the program.
Yep.
And what they will do is, if you're a business owner like myself, you can actually attend these workshops for free. And part of the workshops, the organisation's personnel that will help you actually talk about what is a domain, how do you register for domain name?
Yeah.
How do you create an online shop? What is Facebook ads? What is Instagram ads? All these digital sales funnels. Part of the program, it's to help really lift that literacy for small business owners. So I'm pretty excited about that. The only letdown I saw in that specific strategy was out of $1.2 billion, only $30 million was spent on SMEs. But $30 million is still a lot of money.
Yeah.
I will not grumble over that.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny they had the 350 places for the Be Your Own Boss workshop, which is token but nice.
Yeah, I guess you can say it's sort of, if that funding or those places weren't there before, this is a positive thing to have them there. But it's a good point that you make, Alan. in such a big budget measure, a lot of the funding for that strategy is going to the government's own digital platforms, like fixing MyGov, which at some point a lot of business owners would have some interaction with MyGov, but not necessarily for running their own business. So it's important to keep that in mind when the headlines say 1.2 billion for the digital economy. Some of that is for government services. I just wanted to bring it back to e-invoicing. Peter, I know you've been heavily involved in getting Australia to the point that it's at with e-invoicing. Can you fill us in a little bit about the background and where things are at now?
It's a great story, the e-invoicing. So it's been driven by the tax office. There was a very visionary person who worked in the tax office that approached us and said, we want to work on e-invoicing. And then they made sure it was small business focused. So I was the chair of the Digital Business Council. Matthew Addison, who you know, who's the head of the Certified Bookkeepers Association, or Institute of Certified Bookkeepers rather, he really drove it. And because we needed to make sure it was small business friendly, that was the issue. You could design anything for big business, they can fit in with those things, and good on them. So we spent some time driving it. Now, it lost impetus for a while there, which was interesting, very frustrating, because in the tax office there was a change of personnel and the new one didn't really get it. And then New Zealand and New South Wales came on board and said, we really need this. And Malcolm Turnbull, as the Prime Minister, said, we really need this. So bang, we've gone back into it. And it's important to remember small business drove this and we're ahead of it. And the same with single touch payroll. It came from small business, right? Why can't, when we do our pay run, why can't we have an extra pay advice to the tax office, basically? But we've got to talk in our terms, right? And this is the trouble. A lot of policymakers, of course, they've never run a small business, not their fault. So we need to get people involved who have run a business, think like business people, and then we can design systems around us rather than around someone's theory. But e-invoicing is going to, as you say, Alan, you know, but I'm from the generation that kept things in a shoebox, etc., or just lost them. And you just hope the tax office didn't sort of order you. Tax office, please.
This live
everything's fine. But yeah, it's quite a big change. And it's a big change for fraud. Right, because most of us are very honest, but this means fraud can, if you're fraudulent, you're going to get caught more than likely. And I think we all agree, good, catch them, because the rest of us are honest. So it's got many, many benefits. Yeah,
I think anything that can make it easier to just get on with the job of running a business has to be welcomed. On that front, there's some other changes that we can sort of touch on briefly around the government's going to do a little bit more work around the insolvency regime. They're going to review some of those aspects, so I think that's a welcome development as well. And on the for tech companies in particular, they're also making some reforms to the employee share scheme system, I guess you would call it. Ailia, I know you've been looking at that in a bit more closer detail. Is it something that's relevant to your business? Yeah, definitely. For our startup, we because at the beginning we're a bit cash strapped, so we subsidise our employees with share bonuses, and so having that increase, I think it was from 5,000 to 30,000 for the share ownership scheme will be fantastic for them. So that's a great plus for us. Yeah, that's great. I'm just going to stop briefly there to remind you about the survey that we're running for listeners at home. That's going to close in a few moments. So if you want to quickly select your options and then we'll discuss the feedback there. I guess for any budget, there's a decision that the government makes about who are going to be the winners and losers by the very nature of where they're choosing to spend their money, and it's not possible necessarily to please everyone. But I think there was some areas that we can identify as missing out in this budget. Ailia, I know you've got some thoughts on that. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm devastated to not see climate change in the top 10. I think that a government trying to pick winners and focus on specific sectors like hydrogen and carbon capture and utilisation and storage and those kind of things are all wonderful, but we really want something that incorporated all businesses to be able to participate, and I don't think that's really captured in the budget at all. I've got a favourite quote that is the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And I think that this budget sort of reinforces that. It's someone else's problem. They can deal with it. Innovation will solve everything. That's just very disappointing.
Yeah. Peter, were there any omissions that you noticed? I know before you talked about vocational education. Do you think that there's some missing pieces there?
Well, it's the coherence of it. I'll be getting a briefing later on this afternoon, so hopefully that'll bring it together. But it's an area we know one of the biggest problems we've got in small business, is finding staff at the moment. You're seeing it right across Australia in business, in cities and in regional areas. And that is really connected to training. So we need to get out there. We wanted to see a thing called place-based support, so that a business in Dubbo or in Canberra or in Queanbeyan or whatever, who wants a staff member but can't find them, and there's unemployed people, we have training organisations that can give them the skills in where they live. And we've also got an organisation that can talk to the unemployed people and counsel them if they need that, and help them understand the best way to get back into a job. And then we've also got the issue around international students and skilled migrants who fill those jobs quite often that we can't fill. Now that comes back in a lot of ways to quarantine or people coming in. We've got to fix that. And at the moment, that's what I hear about. I mean, a lot of my members talked about climate change, but at the moment when you talk to them, first thing they say is, I can't get staff. It's really quite interesting. So you do that at the place where the business is. You don't fix that from a Treasury office.
Yeah. Alan, are you experiencing that at the moment, that it can be difficult to find the people you need in your business?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, during COVID, I was just telling Peter before that during COVID, our business really took off, our online shop, digital. So really big fan of, that digital online store space. And we actually ended up hiring 3 people over 3 months. And we actually ended up letting 2 of the 3 of them go. And it could just be us, being really new business owners, not trying to bed down the recruitment process, but it was just a skill mismatch. There's only so many questions you can ask in an interview to make a deduction on and look at the CV and make a deduction on whether this person will fit the role you're trying to fill. But it's only when they are there trying to do the work that you can really, evaluate.
Yep.
And unfortunately, 2 of the 3 was just a skill mismatch more than anything else, and we had to let them go because we as a small business, we just can't run on excessive inefficiencies through workforce participation.
Yeah, and can I add to that? I mean, that's a really good point, is small businesses aren't a small version of a big business. We don't have an HR department doing what you just said and being experts. And so when we expect a small business person to do that, they've got to spend time doing it, not doing other things, etc. And that's why we need place-based support for you, so you can go to someone and say, can you help me find this person? Now, you can do that through Seek, you can do that through a lot of other places, but that also doesn't work for a small business, because you put it on Seek and then you get all these applications.
Drown in paperwork.
You've still got to do the same thing. So this is what we're talking about. It's something that we need to do, we need to do soon.
It's interesting that we've found our way to talk about the around hiring and skills and matching that up. The survey that we've been conducting during this event asked our listeners to rank the areas that are most important to them. Grants and other payments came in number 1, then tax reform, and then the third one is incentives for hiring. And it was interesting reading the budget papers last night. The JobMaker hiring credits weren't mentioned at all, and they were a bit of a standout from last year's budget, which was only last October, not even 12 months ago. They've been quietly sort of discontinued, I think is probably the way to describe it. So it seems as though that policy wasn't the right fit. So that was one that provided subsidies for businesses when they hired young workers or workers who'd been sort of on some sort of support payment. Peter, I know you have views on the hiring credits, but it might be most useful for us to discuss what could work, like for a hiring incentive, what really would work for any of the businesses represented here.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to go first. It's, like I said before, it's that place-based support. So I know if there's a business there and they're interested in this hiring credit, they've still got to get their head around it. So you need someone who can walk in and say, this is how it works, and here's 5 people that fit in with that. And then you go, oh, that's great. Okay, so you're looking after the paperwork. I can look at these people, you've given me their CVs, and I'm going to pick this one or whatever it is. You need someone to do that for you. And that was the problem we always said, is that the process. You know, talking to small business, it's 80% process and communications.
Yeah.
You can get the policy right, but if we don't understand it, or the process is confusing, forget it. And that's what happened with Job Maker. And we see Job Train is working quite well because there's organisations involved in that being training organisations. So that works because of that reason. So that's what we need, is someone to come into a business and offer and say, this is how it works and this is what we can do, and then you can get back to your business.
Yeah. Do you both agree with that kind of approach?
Yeah, I think it's the implementation. Like it's all nice to make these policies, but you look at, the Indigenous procurement policy from a few years ago, and the take-up rate of that was so low because it was just hard to implement, and it actually had some negative consequences as well that were unintended. So
yeah,
it needs to be thought through from the whole process, from the small business perspective.
Yeah.
And even for me, for us, for a business, so when I talk about the staff we had to unfortunately let go, one of them was actually, this person was under an incentive scheme. So if we hired them, we actually would get money from the government. But we actually said to ourselves, the money we would get from the government is just not, like, we just can't afford it. Like, the issues we're facing with this person, with the staff, the incentive was great, but it just wasn't worth the cost of running the business with this person. So that's the other thing. So even if you can have the incentives there, it comes back to mismatch in skill sets. And then the question then is there like an intermediary that can help us? Because again, we when we put out the job, we actually had like 60, 70 applicants, and then we actually went through every single one of them to be like, are they the right skill set? And that took hours. And then the interview, like, all that takes so much time, and then it just means we can't run the business, right? So as an SME owner, it's not just about the financial incentives. It's a process, or how can you help us facilitate and find the right people? Because we like to hire, we want to grow the business, but it's the time, it's the process, and that's what we get bogged down doing.
And like you said, taking your time out, that's time that you could be spent on new product development, on marketing, on all sorts of different activities that could grow your business, but you're getting your time is being taken up by processes that could be more straightforward or perhaps easier to understand.
And I guess just coming back to the vocational training, and that's really where I would really advocate that, because it has an indirect effect on hiring as well. Because the thing is, I mean, we all went through high school, I assume, but high school doesn't really, or university doesn't really get us job ready, right? They give us the theory, but it's the operation of the job. And I think that vocational training, that's where you could fill some of that gap to make them more job ready. So that's how I would see it as.
Can I take you both to a Treasury meeting with me and just sit down and explain that? I mean, like, what you're both doing is real. You're successful.
You're real too, Peter.
I'll just take you in there and say, talk. Right? And because people who have never run a business don't get it. And just listening to you two, you know it.
I don't think you can underestimate that real lived experience from small business owners, and we see it all the time at SmartCompany, just getting on the phone to a business owner. They're the experts in small business, not us. We're learning from business owners. So thank you for sharing those experiences that you had last year. It's really helpful. From our survey of the listeners at home, they also mentioned tax reform as being quite a high priority, and we can't really talk about a budget without talking about tax reform. There is going to be some change to the small business company tax rate, but that's been sort of bedded in for some time now. Were there any other tax measures that caught your attention last night? There's not many more that come to mind for me, so that's interesting. Normally, it's one of the big topics that we do discuss. Yeah.
I think it was just similar to what Ali was saying about in the climate change space, just picking winners. So again, for example, there were specific industry tax offsets to gaming, medical, and biotech industries. And again, I have nothing against those industries. I guess the question then I have is, well, if what you're trying to create is innovation in those industries, well, innovation is just a concept. It's a process, and that can exist in any industry to create, I guess, increased productivity. The question then is, well, why do we have to make it industry specific? If you want to spur innovation, why can't we make it, I guess, industry agnostic? So that'd be just my view from an SME point of view.
Yeah.
I think that the patent box was a great little initiative. I know it's only sort of the biotech and medical industries at the moment, but hopefully they'll expand that out to clean tech and further, because I think that's, we need to be more innovative in Australia, where we're not, like Israel and the States, where that's kind of their culture, and the same with the venture capital investment scheme. So there's a review. It didn't really give a policy, but they said there was a review of the venture capital scheme, because you look at Octopus Deploy, which just raised $223 million from a US VC firm, and our Australian venture capital firms are just missing out on those kind of opportunities, and we need to be a bit more risk-taking and adventurous and innovative.
So a couple of bright spots there that then if they were applied broader, might have a good effect.
Big dollar figures, but hope for the future.
So also from our survey, the number one area that people were looking for were grants or some other kind of payments from government. And we've also had a question from someone at home asking why, I think this is what they're asking, why so many respondents just thought that they should get a handout from the government. And this is something that comes up a little bit about sort of some people, I guess, wanting that cash from the government versus other people who say, well, we don't need the government to give us money. We just need the government to make it easier for us to earn our own money. Wonder if we can discuss that. To my knowledge, there weren't many specific sort of grant or any grant payments, or any new grant payments, I should say, in the budget last night, but there very well could have been. I think there were some sort of continuations of programs that essentially gave people access to things like that, but nothing new. Peter, do you want to touch on that topic of, I guess, a government handout versus...
I love it, because I always say you don't go into business to get a government handout.
Yeah.
You go into business to be independent, right? So when a business is looking for a grant, it's not a handout, as I say. You don't do that. There's a reason for it. Right, I can't do this, I can't do that, I needed support to get, it might be the software for single touch payroll, or whatever it is. I don't use software for my pay because I've had the same person and I use Excel, and now I've got to spend $100 a month on something. Why do I have to do that just to fit in with the government? So the government came up with some software that people can use, which is really nice, but we see people getting money all around the place. We want to give someone a job. We're going to struggle with that, as you say, because 60 applications, and you went through every one of them. It's awful. And so we need support with that. Now, it may be a grant, but it may also be setting up a mechanism to come and support me. Yeah. And so when we talk about handouts, that's not something that we want. Anybody that needs a handout shouldn't be in business.
I beg to differ a little bit.
But I say if you want a grant with an aim, that's totally different.
So it's not quite in this budget, but the Female Founders Grant, which we're applying for at the moment, globally, female founders raised 2.8% of global VC investment in 2019, and that was an all-time high. In 2020, it dropped back down to 2.3%. So that's not equality, and it's female founders aren't being given the same opportunities, and I think there needs to be more targets around female founders, and all those women get out there and start businesses and start getting some of it. The government's package on the women's budget, and half of that's childcare, which is arguably not women's, then I think there could have been more support in terms of female founders, because that's only got 12 million commitment, I think, from
women,
the last
more
budget.
women starting businesses than men. And we've got a project funded by the government called the Future Female Entrepreneurs Program, and that goes into schools starting with girls 10 and working our way up to get them to understand that there's all these options, and whereas a man may just, I can be a CEO one day if I'm silly enough, but with a woman it doesn't for some reason be the natural thing. So we're working on that. But I agree with you, there's Again, we come back to place-based. You know, the women aren't in an office in Treasury wanting to start a business, they're out in the suburbs, and we need to get out there and support them in the way they want to be supported. And so that's not a handout, that's support, and that's to add to the economic growth of the country through an underutilised group of people.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen this in other areas too, when there is some level of inequality or some groups are not getting access to the same resources or same funding. There is a role there for, I think, for government to play, whether it is offering grants to develop a particular product or to expand overseas or something like that. I think that's important.
In the budget, there's some areas around international taxation issues. I know the brewing area is getting some work. Where they often make a mistake is they'll design a system for all small businesses. Yeah. And as we heard today, I always say there's no such thing as small business. That's an economist's description of an economic unit. There's manufacturers and there's innovators and there's people in retail, and they're all different. So we need to target more at where that goes. And the grants might only go to 5,000 people or businesses in the end, but they might really count.
Yeah.
So we need to know a small business is a person. It's not a thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I absolutely agree that the government, by definition, their role is to address market failures. So if female founders participation is all-time high, but they're not getting the same financial resources and opportunities, then there isn't. I just think there is a role for the government to step in and to do it, and it could be through the program, the funding program that's Alia talked about as well.
And I think we could also apply a similar way of thinking to businesses in regional areas. And that's one of the audience questions that came through from people signing up for today's session, is the balance between budget measures for metropolitan-based businesses versus regional areas, and whether the government is getting that balance right. But back to the grants thing, I think there is a role to play there to support businesses in regions who might not have as ready access to the same kinds of services or the digital workshops or the advice around the software for payroll, that kind of thing. I can see you nodding there, Peter. Do you agree? Oh,
I was just thinking. I mean, what Alia is doing is something that needs to be pushed out as well, because a lot of people will really come on board with that. But there's also this amazing change as a result of COVID. So at the moment, one of our big areas of concern is the CBDs in the major cities, and they're empty. Businesses in there are really struggling. So if you're a butcher shop in the CBD of Melbourne, you're in big trouble. If you're a butcher shop in the suburbs, you're going really well. And so the regions are the same. It's really interesting. So the CBDs and the regions at the moment can have some similar problems. And that's again coming back, let's target the issue, not target everything, but target where the problems are. And in this budget, they have done some specific targeting. I agree with you around climate change in that area. I think there's some more work needs to be done there, and most people want work done there. I think that's a political thing, but I think we need to target where the problems are and find out where they are and then go there. Yeah. And work with people that can grow. I mean, the opportunity to grow these businesses. Do you want to grow?
Well, we don't get into business not to grow.
That's right.
And I think I would add to that too is, and once those areas are identified, then go and speak to the business owners who are experiencing that. Go speak to Alia, who's applying for the Female Founders Grant, and is that process easy to understand? My take is that it's probably more complex than it needs to be. Or go to visit a business like Alan's and find out, well, how could we support locally made products and manufacturing? What would really make a difference? And then design the policy from that point.
If I can say, understanding the interaction between, say, Alia's business and the other businesses, because they concentrate on yours and forget, well, in actual fact, you're doing a lot of B2B stuff, and that's really important to understand that interaction and how it works. And I think, again, as you say, coming out and talking is going to pick up that information, and they can build better policies. And our policies are pretty good, but they will get better when they talk to people on the ground who are doing it.
And if we can fix the NBN and get regionals to have, equal access to technology, then I think, there's a big opportunity there for them to really expand with remote workforce and to be able to, zoom into calls to people who they need in the CBD. So.
Yeah.
Interesting with the NBN rollout, as they rolled it out, they'd find more women would start businesses where it was rolled out than men would,
Okay, that's
because they
interesting.
found this opportunity and they took advantage.
That's great.
See, all that comes back to digital, though, like MBA.
Yeah.
All that stuff comes back to, and then this is why like being in a digital economy is so important. It's not just metro, you know. Obviously, it's actually because you can make anything anywhere in Australia and sell it anywhere now. The question is, how do you grow your capability in regional area
And find the right staff.
Yeah.
Thanks for the listeners at home sending in some questions as we're discussing these big topics. On the issue of handouts, whether we want to use that word, Zoe is asking, instead of a handout, what about matching and subsidising small businesses with industries in need of support from innovative products and processes? So I guess more of a matching program, or if you're already going to do this in your business, you can access some kind of subsidy to make it easier or more attractive.
Yeah, so to be honest, I see two fronts in this one. So there's the match funding, and I can only speak from experience in ACT. So ACT government, not the federal government, for example, they offer match funding for match funding grants for specific outcomes. You know, when you're trying to create new innovative cocktails or carbon accounting software, things like that, there is those opportunities that already exist. It's not just at the federal level, but then it's a really good plug to really look at the state and territory government level as well, that there could already be policies, programs there in place to actually help small businesses. So that's me with the match funding. But then I guess the other one is we haven't really talked about today is the R&D tax offset.
Yep.
So, and I think we didn't talk about it because the government decided not to touch it this year, which is good. But R&D tax offset is really a tax offset to particularly help small businesses who are particularly pre-revenue, where you need to create innovative products and processes, and that takes up money and time.
Yep.
And what the government's trying to do is actually give us really generous tax offsets, which is refundable in money to businesses when they undertake activities that are innovative in process or product.
Yeah, so it's making it more possible, more attractive for businesses to undertake that work that leads to enormous potential for growth.
Yep.
What's your view on, I guess, matched funding, Ailea? Is that something that you would find useful in your startup?
Yeah, definitely, and I have received some from ACT government as well.
Yeah.
And I think that the Canberra Innovation Network in Canberra is an amazing resource to be able to sort of make those connections and figure out, you know, what you need as a small business and startup and find out what's available in government and try and match up those processes. I think there's similar things in Sydney and Adelaide that are going really well, and probably Melbourne as well. I just don't know of them. So that's a really valuable resource. And the other bit I was going to say. Yeah.
It's all place-based. It's where you are. They're not trying to do it from Treasury. They're doing it where you are and talking to you.
Exactly.
And it's a real lesson there.
And it's a great community that you're involved in.
Yeah.
Another question from one of our listeners, Madeline, and she's asking, how will the hospitality sector be supported to re-engage employees and reinvigorate customs? Peter, what are you hearing from your members who are working in and around the hospitality sector? What are some of the challenges there?
Well, the challenge for some of them, it depends which state they're in, depends where they are, depends on the distancing rules. So first of all, let me say finding staff. Right, it's the first thing I hear from anybody anywhere really. I can't find people to work, and that's really important in that sector. Secondly, a business plan built around not doing any distancing is a very different business plan from one where you've got a distance, and then you've got rent is such an issue in these areas. The big landlords in the biggest centres, I have no time for them, you probably know that. A lot of the other landlords can be different, smaller landlords can be much better sometimes, well mostly, but that's an issue. The rent, the business plan that goes with it, the lack of staff to bring people in, and where you are. If you're out in the regional area like Orange, everybody's going to Orange. So you're getting lots of custom, but where are the staff to manage that custom? So we're hearing of the owners being quite distraught, quite tired, because they're trying to deliver a service and they just can't deliver it. And then, as I say, in some places in the city, it's the rent. is really causing big issues there. So that will resolve itself eventually, but certainly that's an area we've got to look at along with event planning.
Yep.
Right, because events are starting to come back. At the moment, you can't get we're planning our event for August, and it's hard to get accommodation in Sydney to run an event. Everybody wants to run an event, which is great. So they're coming back, we hope. But then if you're relying upon international tourism, so we're talking again CBDs or North Queensland or whatever, they've got no future yet until the borders are opened.
So what could the government do, governments I should say, whether federal or state, what could they do on this issue of re-engaging employees or finding the right people? Is it what we discussed earlier about that sort of localised support?
Got to be. Because again, we just heard from Alan and I, Leah, that the answers are here. They're not there, they're here. And when you come out, we talk, we swap information, the government swaps information, supports with helping with the paperwork where necessary, and that's how we'll get it done. So you go to the places where the problems are, or the opportunities are, and work with the business people. You don't work with the businesses, you work with the individuals.
Got a little bit of a different question here. One of our audience members submitted this before the session, and that's around payroll tax. And it's interesting, it always comes up when we discuss the federal budget, but it is a state-based thing. But this listener is asking, what could the federal government do to encourage, I guess, perhaps, I'm not sure if they meant a reduction in payroll tax or maybe a more cohesive approach across the country, because we've got different rates and we've got different thresholds and different incentives were announced last year for COVID support. Do you have a view on payroll tax at all, Alan?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, tax, end of the day, is just a lever to incentivise or disincentivize decisions. So in a previous life, I actually worked at Commonwealth Treasury, and we and we did look at payroll tax, and it's just fascinating, right? So in Canberra, for example, last I remember, payroll tax threshold is $1.8 million. So if your payroll is less than that, you pay no tax. But if you're in Queanbeyan and the threshold 600, like around the $600,000 mark, from memory, you know. Much lower than 1.8 million. So then you're creating these incentives. You're just like, well, I just have to have be in a suburb like Beard, which is literally just 2 suburbs away from Queanbeyan, and you get the high threshold. So I think there is a huge disincentive, and what it's really creating is just more administrative burden for SMEs. Because the thing is, SMEs, some SMEs can hire a lot of people. It's not just the likes of Woolworths and Coles to hire thousands of people. There's actually lots of SMEs who hire a lot of people who can actually quite quickly add up to those $600,000, $800,000 salary, and then that's when working in different states and territory, and that creates I think a lot of administrative paperwork and burden for small business owners. Yeah,
absolutely. I wasn't aware of that difference between the locations in this region.
And then it's crazy too, because it's the rate. The rate is different. So not only is the threshold different, the rate is different. Then you just got to have a calculator and actually start punching out how do you optimize to legally minimize your tax. And it's just I think our time gets as business owners, our time will get sucked into that. How to optimize tax as opposed to let's run a bit. Again, we didn't go into business for handouts. We didn't go into business to minimize tax. We went into business to grow a business, to grow activities and functions. And I just think sometimes these kind of tax arrangements eat up a lot of our time. So that's my view. So my view would be, we should be simplifying payroll tax. And I'm sure the ATO Treasury has had multiple conversations.
I can see why you're in Treasury, you wouldn't have fit it in.
On a completely different topic now, Hannah, listening in, has asked if there was any targeted support for Indigenous entrepreneurs and businesses in the federal budget. I didn't identify any reading last night. Leah, I know that's an area that you mentioned before about a policy from a few years back. So did you spot anything this time around?
Not that I can recall, but I know the Female Founders Grant does have a section for Indigenous and regional to give them a special priority and a higher rate as well.
It's an interesting observation I got from someone who's been in that area a while, that going back 10 years, Indigenous businesses, there weren't as many, but he did some research and he said the really nice thing is there seems to be more, and they seem to be responding. We're talking about up North Queensland and what have you. So they're coming through, and a lot of the issues, I've dealt with this before, is you still come across some people saying, oh, it's not part of their culture to run a business. What name a culture where it's not part of it to run a business? So I think we've moved on, which is good, but I didn't see anything in the budget either.
No, unless I missed something, I didn't see it either. It's interesting though, I know the government has been doing some work around setting targets around procurement for Indigenous businesses, and procurement actually was mentioned in the budget last night, which I was really pleased to see, and the government has, it's a small commitment money-wise, well, in relative terms, it's a couple of $1 million, but they've outlined 5 steps that they're going to take to try and increase the ability of small businesses to win government contracts, and we know how valuable those contracts can be. So one, and again, we'll be waiting on a bit more detail on this, but one was about mapping the procurement process to identify where those pain points are for SMEs. And I think that's really getting to the heart of what we're discussing today, is that going to that business owner level and really understanding what makes it so difficult to apply for a tender or to get onto a government panel and that kind of thing. And it can be really, it's something that a lot of small businesses get excluded from, because only a certain number of people will get on the government panel, and then they're asked to tender for the government contract. So I was personally really pleased to see some changes there, or potential for changes. I can see lots of nodding heads. Is that a view that's shared?
Yeah, and I didn't mention that because I just feel like it's such almost a Canberra bubble, you know, like with the Indigenous procurement process. Like, you know, there are policies in place where if you're an Indigenous business owner, you do get preferences over other non-Indigenous businesses. But again, it's really focusing on government contracts, and if you're not where most of the contracts is in Canberra, then so that's the reason why I didn't mention it, because I don't want to get people into a black hole, be like, well, how do I do it? But really, I think what government needs to do is the panels, for example, the panel cycle's like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
Right. So if you missed it, like if the panel came on last year, you have to wait 2 or 3 years. It doesn't matter if you're Indigenous or not. You've got to wait a long time to be able to have an opportunity to become the panel. So I think again it comes back to, it's not just about, well, how do we encourage Indigenous business owners to win contracts. It's actually, well, how do we make it easier for businesses?
Give them the opportunity.
How do we actually make it easier for SMEs? Because again, statistically speaking, females, Indigenous, like the minority demographics, they're the owners of SMEs, right? Like really, you know, again, I know there are some bigger organisations that are run by females, Indigenous, but really the majority of those SMEs are those minority, right? So we need to help the SMEs in general.
And you're saying it's the Canberra bubble, but you know, the government's had a decentralisation policy for a while now, and so they are moving more and more departments to regional centres, and the increase from an 80,000 to a 200,000 procurement level for SMEs to bring it in line with the Indigenous business procurement is something that more SMEs around the country can take advantage of and start participating in. So yeah, I'd encourage all the listeners to get out there and start applying for government contracts. Yeah.
And it comes back to information. Like they need to know the opportunities.
What's available. Yeah. And I think the difficult thing with putting in those applications, I should mention my father is a consultant, so he applies for government contracts, but there's a lot of work preparing the tender, applying, and you haven't earned any money through that process yet, and then you've got to be successful to then win the government contract. So I feel like there's some steps along the way that there could be some more support, or reduce some of the complexity, or open up more tender opportunities, and hopefully give people a bigger share of that pie.
Yeah, instead of encouraging small business, maybe encourage the public servants to understand small business and the process. That to me will then make it easier once they understand. And you still get people that say, you're in business, you should be able to do it. You think, oh yeah, okay. Well, you go and run a business, then come back and say that.
But that 80 to 200,000 will help a little bit. Like that's just increasing that threshold of the full tender process. Then that's a foot in the door for some.
Yeah. We're getting towards the end of our session here, but we've got a great question here from Catherine listening in. And she's asked, do you think this budget should give business owners the confidence to start investing in their own growth again? So I think what we're asking is will it do enough to improve confidence levels, which can be really important across the sector? What do you think, Peter?
I think it will. I mean, it's a good budget. The confidence now depends upon the quarantine, depends upon COVID, and we've done incredibly well. But I think, last night when I read it, I thought, yep, this is confidence territory. And again, depends what industry you're in.
Yeah.
But a lot of people out there should take confidence from this.
Aliyah and Alan, do you feel some level of confidence on some parts of the budget at least?
I'll let you first.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's a cash splash, and the economy's recovered better than we expected, and with borders closed, we've got a good economy here that we can keep growing. So I'd encourage all businesses to take the tax cuts and the instant write-off and pick up where the budget left off in terms of climate change.
Yeah. And
start putting an internal price on and factoring that into your decision making, and get the benefits.
Yeah.
I just think particularly for SMEs, consumer confidence is just so important, because if consumers don't have confidence to spend, then we don't receive, right, as owners. So I think with all the cash splash and the economy doing better than expected, there's huge, really all-time high for consumer confidence, which gives them the confidence to spend money. And that is an opportunity for businesses to start thinking, well, how do I get some of that spend? Let it be cafe or let it be out, like drinks business or any business. And then, so I think, it gives you that really good platform to be like, okay, well, there is demand there. So how do I capture that demand? And I think the instant asset write-off, like I said, if you have the money to spend on to build your capability, but even just some of the digital strategy digital economy strategy we were talking about before, around not just e-invoicing, but even just the other one, there's a lot of government assistance program to help you build a business. What's a business plan? It actually helps you build business plans, help you, register domain. There's actually a lot of government assistance around that can actually help you, I guess, really solidify how to grow your business or how to start a business. And I think we should definitely encourage business owners to actually look up these resources, let it be your local innovation network, business network, join your business chamber, like local business chamber, to get resources, information, to, I guess, COSPA, Well, it's an association, right?
Our association.
Okay. So just lots of resources out there, and from credible sources. Obviously, SmartCompany has lots of good articles as well that you can check out. So
No, thank you. I think that's a good note for us to end on, and we'll try and answer a question from Patrick too in our closing remarks. And he's asked, what's our overall assessment of the budget? I guess from my point of view, from SmartCompany's point of view, we do see it as a positive for small businesses and for startups too. There was a lot for the tech scene. It was interesting when I read the budget speech as soon as I got into the lockup yesterday. Of course, there's some mentions of small businesses, although they were lumped in with housing, which is an interesting choice. And of course, the government described SMEs as the backbone of the economy, or I think engine room of the economy is the line that they use. But for me, it was like digging down into the budget papers number 2. There were lots of little things that I think will be really helpful. Some of them are reviews, some of them are commitments to look at certain aspects, like with procurement. There's a new franchise disclosure registry which will be established, which will benefit that sector. So my feeling was that maybe the government is listening to some of the pain points that are coming through from the sector, and this budget sets a scene for acting on some of those. Alan, what's overall your take?
Yeah, well, similar to Peter, I think it's a really good budget. It's a lot of money being spent to increase confidence. There are, like I said, a lot of these spends actually indirectly help businesses, right? Good consumer confidence. I think a lot of money got spent on aged care, which is really good because we saw what happened when aged care facilities aren't well funded, particularly in the COVID situation. It has a huge drag on the economy and on consumers and families. So I think by spending money to really address aged care and addressing child care, that I agree it's not a women issue, but childcare is a huge cost for a lot of families.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's mental health for females. So I think there's a lot of enabling policies that will have an enabling effect on the economy and on businesses. So I think overall it's a good budget. I haven't come up with a score yet, but I would say it is quite positive for consumers and businesses.
Great. And Ilea, what's your assessment?
I think it's a missed opportunity. I think it could have been a chance to spend money to create a net zero future, and being in business a kind of maybe we'd like to get to net zero by 2050, maybe possibly earlier, is unbelievable and unrealistic. And so I think putting hydrogen in front of the funding for gas-fired coal is just very disappointing. But from a business perspective, I'd just encourage you to pick up where the government left off and keep progressing forward.
Great, thank you. And Peter, are we still sitting at a 7.5 rate?
Oh yeah, distinction. Yeah. Yes, it's like that. But I mean, it's really interesting hearing from business people. I just love it because that informs what we say out there. That my opinion doesn't count. It's what people tell me to pass on. And it's a good budget right across the board. As you say, there's always opportunity missed, and I agree with you on that. Climate change area, we saw Extinction Rebellion up at the House this morning, blocking the whole thing off. Not supporting that, but they're making a point, and we want to see that focus in small business, as you said, and you were saying we can get a lot out of the aged care, we can get a lot out of infrastructure, we can get a lot out of all these sorts of things, and we need to for the sake of the economy.
Yeah. And I guess the other point to touch on is that it is likely to be the last budget before we head to the election polls again, which perhaps influenced the level of spending. I think that the next election has to be by May next year, so maybe they'll sneak another one in there. But I think it's worth keeping in mind as we're discussing the budget, because the budget is, in a sense, it's a statement of priorities or things that the government would like to do. Some of these things might not come off depending on what legislation they can get through. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. Any final remarks before we say goodbye to our listeners today?
Not from me.
I think I made mine.
I reckon this has been a really good panel.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me.
And well done as always.
And thank you for everyone listening at home, for sending in all your questions, for voting in our survey. It's great to get that sort of live feedback as to the issues that are really important to you. And thank you once again to Reckon for making this event possible today. It's lovely to be bringing this panel to you from Canberra. We haven't been able to travel for some time now to come to these kinds of events. So thank you once again for joining me, and thank you at home.